Picture the Indian Ocean in the early 1700s. The golden age of piracy wasn't just a bunch of guys with eye patches drinking rum. It was a brutal, highly organized syndicate of outlaws who held empires hostage. And right in the middle of this chaos was a man named Olivier Levasseur, better known by his terrifying nickname, the Buzzard. He didn't get that name by being gentle. He got it because of the ruthless, blinding speed with which he attacked his prey. But what makes his story different from Blackbeard or Captain Kidd isn't just the violence, it's the money. We are talking about arguably the largest single heist in the history of the world. In April 1721, Levasseur and his crew stumbled upon the absolute motherlode. Anchored off the coast of Reunion Island was a Portuguese galleon named the Nossa Senhora do Cabo. But this wasn't just any ship. It belonged to the Bishop of Goa and the Viceroy of Portugal, and it was essentially a floating fortress filled with the accumulated wealth of an entire empire. And the craziest part? The ship had been damaged in a storm, so they had dumped all of their cannons overboard to stay afloat. They were sitting ducks. Levasseur swooped in and took the ship without firing a single shot. When they opened the cargo hold, even the most hardened pirates couldn't believe their eyes. Mountains of gold and silver coins, boxes, overflowing with raw diamonds, pearls the size of apples, and the piece de resistance, the fiery cross of Goa. This was a massive solid gold cross encrusted with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, so heavy that it took 3 grown men just to carry it. Historians estimate that in today's money, the loot from that single ship would be worth over $1 billion. Every single crew member became unimaginably rich overnight. But Levasseur, being the captain, took the lion's share. You would think a man with that much wealth would just retire, buy a tropical island, and live out his days in luxury. But that isn't what happened. Instead of vanishing into a comfortable retirement, Levasseur made a choice that would seal his fate and spark a 300-year-old mystery that has driven men entirely mad. He decided to hide the treasure. And he didn't. Just bury it in a shallow grave on a random beach. He engineered a puzzle so incredibly complex, so deeply layered with codes and riddles, that even modern supercomputers haven't been able to crack it. He knew the authorities were closing in. The British and French navies had finally had enough of the pirates disrupting their trade routes, and they were hunting down the pirate captains one by one. Levasseur knew his days were numbered, so he took his vast fortune and disappeared into the labyrinth of islands in the Indian Ocean. For years, no one knew where he went or what he did with the gold. He just vanished like a ghost in the fog, leaving behind nothing but whispers and rumors among the taverns of Madagascar. But the law eventually caught up with him, and that is where the story goes from. A simple historical heist to the most baffling unsolved mystery of the modern world. Fast forward to July 1730. Levasseur has finally been captured and is standing on a wooden scaffold on Reunion Island, a noose tight around his neck. The authorities have spent months trying to torture the location of the treasure out of him, but he hasn't said a word. He just smiled at them. Now, surrounded by a massive crowd of locals, soldiers, and undercover pirates, he is about to be executed. But right before the trapdoor opens, he does something completely unexpected. He reaches into his shirt, pulls out a piece of parchment, and throws it directly into the cheering crowd. As the paper flutters through the air, he shouts his final words, "Find my treasure, the one who may understand it." The trapdoor drops, and Levasseur is dead. But the crowd completely ignores the execution. They are scrambling, fighting, tearing at each other to get their hands on that piece of parchment. Because that wasn't just a final letter or a confession. It was a cryptogram. 17 lines of bizarre, entirely unknown symbols. It didn't look like any language on Earth. It looked like the frantic scribblings of a madman. And just like that, the greatest treasure hunt in human history was born. For decades, the cryptogram circulated among the underground networks of the Indian Ocean. People thought it would be easy. They assumed it was a simple substitution cipher, the kind pirates used all the time. Just swap a letter for a star, another for a triangle, and you'd be a billionaire. But every single person who tried to crack it hit a massive brick wall. The symbols didn't follow the normal rules of linguistics. There were strange repetitions, weird spacings, and symbols that seemed to borrow from Masonic alphabets, ancient runic texts, and even astrological charts. It was as if Levasseur had spent his years in hiding, not just burying gold, but studying esoteric texts to create a code that was virtually unbreakable. And here is where things get genuinely creepy. The cryptogram wasn't just a map, it felt like a curse. Almost everyone who got deeply involved with deciphering it ended up either ruined, bankrupt, or dead under mysterious circumstances. It was like Levasseur had designed the puzzle not to be solved, but to consume the souls of anyone greedy enough to try. Some researchers believe the original document thrown from the scaffold was torn to pieces, and that what exists today is a pieced-together copy, meaning we might not even have the full puzzle. Others think the cryptogram is just the final key and that you need other clues, hidden in the geography of the islands themselves, just to know where to begin. Imagine holding a piece of paper that you absolutely know leads to $1 billion, but you just can't read it. It is the ultimate psychological torture. The French government even tried to secretly fund expeditions in the 1800s, bringing in their top military codebreakers. These were men who cracked enemy communications during wars, but they looked at Levasseur's cryptogram and threw their hands up in defeat. The sheer arrogance of Levasseur to toss this puzzle into the crowd, knowing full well that no one would be able to solve it, is just mind-blowing. He died laughing at them all. It wasn't until the early 20th century that the hunt escalated from a historical curiosity to a full-blown obsession, largely thanks to a woman named Rose Savy. She lived on the island of Mahé in the Seychelles, and one day she was walking along the beach near her home when she noticed something strange. The water level was unusually low, exposing massive granite boulders that were normally submerged, and carved into these rocks were deliberate, unnatural markings. There were shapes of dogs, snakes, turtles, horses, and most chillingly, a distinct carving of a human eye staring out toward the ocean. Someone had spent weeks, maybe months, chiseling these symbols into the hard stone. Rose had heard the local legends, and she immediately contacted a notary who happened to have a copy of the famous cryptogram. When they compared the symbols on the rocks to the symbols on the parchment, the hairs on the back of their necks stood up. There were undeniable, exact similarities. It was the first physical proof that the cryptogram wasn't a hoax. Levasseur had actually been here. The news spread like wildfire, eventually reaching a man named Reginald Cruise Wilkins, a former British military man who would become the most famous figure in this entire saga. Reginald looked at the clues and completely lost his mind to the hunt. He moved to the Seychelles, bought the land where the carvings were found, and spent the next 27 years of his life doing nothing but digging. He quickly realized that Levasseur wasn't just a pirate. He was a brilliant, highly educated architect of deception who had hidden his treasure using a complex system based on the 12 labors of Hercules mixed with the alignment of the stars. Reginald discovered that the carvings on the rocks were essentially a massive island-wide compass. If you connected the eye, the snake, and the dog, they pointed to specific underground caverns. But Levasseur had set traps. Oh yes, real, Indiana Jones-style booby traps. Reginald and his crew uncovered artificial tunnels that were intentionally designed to flood with seawater the moment you breached them. They found huge boulders delicately balanced on wooden beams that had rotted away over centuries, waiting to crush anyone who dug too deep. They even found a cave that had been artificially sealed with a crude cement made of crushed coral. Inside, they found old pirate pistols, gold coins from the 1700s, and something that made Reginald's blood run cold: human remains. Skeletons of pirates who had likely helped Levasseur bury the treasure, only to be murdered and left behind to guard it in the dark. But despite all these incredible discoveries, the main vault, the cavern holding the billion-dollar mother lode and the fiery cross of Goa, remained just out of reach. Reginald exhausted his entire fortune, ruined his health, and eventually died in 1977, completely broken by the puzzle. He had moved thousands of tons of rock, deciphered parts of the cryptogram, and mapped out the underground network, but he died with empty pockets. You'd think that would be the end of it, a cautionary tale about greed and obsession. But the curse of the buzzard doesn't let go that easily. Reginald's son, John Cruz Wilkins, took up the mantle. He grew up watching his father consumed by the hunt, and instead of walking away, he picked up the shovel. John brought modern technology into the mix: ground-penetrating radar, sonar, 3D mapping software, and high-tech water pumps. He managed to crack the final layers of his father's theories. According to John, the treasure is hidden in a specific underground cavern that is only accessible at a certain time of year during an incredibly rare low tide, and you have to bypass a massive underwater wall that Levasseur's men built by hand. The problem? The Seychelles government eventually stepped in. The excavation site is now heavily protected, and getting permits to dig with heavy machinery is nearly impossible. John has been fighting bureaucratic red tape for decades, knowing exactly where the gold is, but legally barred from pulling it out of the ground. It is incredibly frustrating. We have the technology, we have the map, we have the exact coordinates of the anomaly underground. But human laws are keeping the greatest treasure in history locked away in the dark. And this brings up a terrifying thought. What if the traps weren't just designed to kill treasure hunters? What if Levasseur designed the cavern to destroy the treasure itself, if it was ever tampered with? Some geologists who have studied the site believe that the underground water channels are hooked up to a central pressure valve made of natural rock. If someone drills into the wrong spot, the entire cavern could collapse, burying the gold, the diamonds, and the giant cross under millions of tons of solid granite, plunging it into the Earth's crust where no one will ever reach it. It's like a dead man's switch, perfectly engineered by a phantom over 300 years ago. So, where does that leave us today? The cryptogram is still largely unsolved by the general public. You can go online right now, look at the 17 lines of gibberish, and try your luck. Many have. Thousands of amateur sleuths, cryptography experts, and even artificial intelligence. Programs have been fed the image of the parchment, trying to find a pattern that human eyes might have missed. But the AI just spits out random, nonsensical French phrases. It turns out, human madness from the 1700s is actually a better encryption method than modern algorithms. There is a very real possibility that the cryptogram is unsolvable without a secondary cipher key, a book, a specific map, or a spoken phrase that Levasseur took to his grave. But there is another, much darker theory that floats around the edges of this mystery. What if the treasure isn't there anymore? Think about it. The Indian Ocean has been completely mapped, colonized, and developed over the last 3 centuries. Is it really possible that $1 billion in gold and jewels has just sat under a beach this entire time? Some historians quietly suggest that the treasure was actually found decades ago, perhaps in the dead of night by a massive corporation or a corrupt government official, and it was secretly laundered into the global economy. If you found $1 billion in untraceable gold, would you tell the world and let the taxman take it, or would you quietly melt it down and become a shadow billionaire? Maybe Reginald Cruz Wilkins wasn't crazy. Maybe he just got there 50 years too late. Or perhaps Levasseur played the ultimate joke on the world. Maybe the cryptogram means absolutely nothing. Maybe he spent all the money or lost it in a storm, and the parchment he threw into the crowd was just a final, spiteful act of a dying man who wanted to watch the world tear itself apart looking for a ghost. We may never know for sure. But as long as those symbols exist, and as long as that carving of an eye stares out into the Indian Ocean, people will keep digging. They will keep dreaming of the moment their shovel hits a wooden chest, and the darkness of the cavern is suddenly illuminated by the sparkle of $1 billion diamond cross. Because the only thing more powerful than logic is hope. What would you do if you cracked the code today? Would you tell the world, or would you keep it for yourself?